So this is the main user interface of Db2 XML ETL Suite. So we are going to open the Db2Xml mapping specification. Remember, the engine is fully generic. It doesn't know any database or any XML whatsoever. So we use this mapping specification to tell the engine exactly what to do on a particular ETL task. So imagine you're an IT manager and you hired a capable senior software developer to cut code to generate this XML. So what are you going to say to this developer? First, you're going to say, well, the source data is in this database. So this OLEDB connection string tells the engine to connect to a particular database. And then you're going to define the data source. You say run this SQL query to get back a result set, and I'll call it country state. You can call it anything else. And run this SQL query and call the data vendor. And run this query and call the result set vendor contact and purchase order and order line. So up to here, you told the programmer where the data come from. And then from here onwards until the end, it is equivalent to an XML schema definition. It's highly similar in syntax. All it does is to tell the engine, this is the XML I want you to create. So you can see the root element of the XML is called purchase orders. It's got a country and state. So each XML file contains a purchase order of a particular state. It's got a vendors element, has multiple vendors. Each vendor you got some details and the address, and a vendor can have multiple contact persons. And then a vendor have made multiple orders. Each order you've got this order details and the employee who handled this order and shipment method, and finally the order line, multiple order lines, and each order line has got the product details and quantity, price, and line total, etc. So you can see this is a reasonably complex XML. The data source is actually the AdventureWorks sample database provided by Microsoft. So as you can see here, you're not telling the engine anything more than you tell the senior programmer. You told the engine, here is the data source, and here is the XML I want you to create. And how does the source map to the XML? You use relational entity attribute. So here we map the root element to the country state data set, and we map the vendor element to the vendor data set. We map contact person element to the vendor contact data set. Order element to the purchase order data set. And order line element to the order line data set. That's all you tell the engine. So the engine is as intelligent as a senior software developer. You just tell the engine this minimum amount of information. The engine will be able to go away and figure out the millions of micro steps to achieve this task. Next, I'm going to show you the actual source database. This is a Microsoft VentureWorks sample database. And these are all the tables that provide data to generate that XML. So now with this XML ETL Suite mapping specification, all we need to do is to run it. So we say Db2Xml generate single, and it's asking us where to save it or existing file. Done. As you can see, the generated XML is exactly as what you ask the engine to generate. So the root element is purchase orders, and each XML file is regarding orders in a particular state. You have multiple vendors. Each vendor would have multiple contact persons, and then you got multiple orders. Each order have handling employee, shipment method, and multiple order lines. We all know that a constantly changing environment is a norm in an organization. So what happens if further down the track the source database has some changes? For example, some columns have been renamed, added, or dropped, or the target XML data structure needs to be changed. So I'll show you how easy and quick it can be done using Db2 XML ETL Suite. So let's go to the original mapping spec. As you can see here, we're not directly creating the XML from tables. Instead, we provide normal SQL queries. So this level of indirection allows us to adapt to changes or hide the changes in the source database. For example, if a field is no longer this field, is from a different table and different column, but we don't want to change the XML or the mapping, all we need to do is to use the S. For example, we say as ordered date or something like that. So we can easily adapt to the changes in the source database. Now let's do some change on the target data XML data structure. For example, we don't want this intermediate contact persons element anymore. We want the contact persons to be directly under the vendor element. All we need to do is to delete it. Alright, let's make another change. Let's, for example, change this product element to product details element. Then let's regenerate the XML. Now let's generate the XML again. And let's save it on top of temp2. Done. As you can see here, there's no contact persons element anymore, and multiple contact person elements are directly under the vendor element. And let's go to the order line. You can see it's now called product details instead of product. So let's go to the original XML, and you can see there was indeed a contact persons element, and it used to be called product element. So you can see here, we spent only 1 minute and we changed the target XML data structure. If you hired that senior developer to cut the code to generate this XML, now when you need to do this change, maybe that person has left. So you hire another contractor and he spends 3 days looking through the code and then do the change and get it thoroughly tested and deployed. It'll take you probably a week. But now you spend only 1 minute. So that's the power of DGMango XML ETL Suite. I know what is your next question. I can hear you asking, do I have to handcraft this whole mapping specification? The answer, luckily, is no. In this B2B transaction scenario, you would have agreed on the XML data structure to exchange with your business partner before you start to create this ETL process. So, and sometimes the XML is an industry standard XML format. So you start with having XML schema definition or DDT, for example. So now I'll show you how to generate this mapping specification from the XML schema definition. Go to Tools, Generate Mapping Spec from XML Schema or Data. So we want to generate a Db2Xml mapping spec. We browse for the data format. Before I click this button, I'd like to show you what is the XML schema definition. So if we double click this, basically, as you can see, the root element has a purchase orders. It looks quite familiar, country, state, and vendors. Then you have a vendor, and if you click this vendor, you get vendor details and contact person and order, etc. Let's go back to the ETL engine, and we say generate mapping specification from the XML schema definition. Now let's save it on top of this, place it. So now, so now you can see the bottom part is exactly what you've seen in previously. You start with purchase orders, country, state, vendors, etc. And this data source is a bit different. So the engine just created some sample data sources for you. And all you need to do is to rename it to whatever you want to call it. You replace the sample SQL query with your query. And then here you add an attribute called relational entity. Then you add in the name of the data source you just created. So as you can see here, you can finish configuring. All you need to do is to create the 4 data sources that you've seen in the previous mapping specification, and then you create 4 attributes to map those data sources to the XML structure. You create one here, and you create one here, contact person. You create one here, map order. Then you create one here. So you could imagine it can be finished within half an hour. So that's all you need to do. You've got a brand new XML schema definition that you need to generate from your database, and in half an hour's time, the ETL process is ready to run.